has completed his 6-week so-called reintegration process and is now back to regular active duty at Joint Base San Antonio, Fort Sam Houston, where he's been recovering. The specifics of his day-to-day duties have not been disclosed.
On the surface, there are obvious questions about where Army Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl goes from here and where the investigation into his missing years will take us. But there are deeper questions about his reintegration into the military and how the Army is handling what still could be an explosive situation depending on what these various investigations reveal. Let's welcome into MidPoint a combat veteran who served in the U.S. Army for 8 years, serving in combat during deployments to Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom and Afghanistan for Operation Enduring Freedom. Now a syndicated writer and commentator. Pleasure to welcome back Amber Barno. Amber, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Amber, from your brief experience and what you know how the military works, when they say that Bowe Bergdahl is back on active duty, what precisely does that mean? Because there are some people saying it doesn't exactly mean what some people are taking it to mean.
Yeah, well, I think that 6 weeks integration process that he had and has now been returned to active duty was a little bit short. After 5 years in captivity with the Taliban or the Haqqani network, it seems a little bit short, but I do agree that most people are taking it a little bit to the extreme as far as Bergdahl being put back on active duty. It's more of a administrative protocol. They have to put him back on active duty. They're not sending him back to the front lines. They're sticking him at a desk job. I think that the Army stretched it a little bit by saying that he was just a normal soldier now, but I also know what they're doing. They're attempting to put him back into the Army culture, the Army lifestyle. It's very structured. You have to be places at certain times, wake up early in the morning, work all day long. They tell you where to go, who you're talking to, etc. It's a very structured lifestyle. So I think in that aspect, that is what they're attempting to do, sort of to continue the reintegration process, but it also is the step needed in order to continue with the investigation as far as desertion goes and possibly charge him.
Let's talk about that right now, because putting him back and reinserting him into military life before the investigation, I think what's happened here, there's a lot of people wondering why the investigation did not immediately move forward as soon as he was out of the hospital before he gets back in working with other soldiers. Can you give us any sort of insight as to how the military works in that area? And perhaps, is this abnormal? Is this something that would normally happen for somebody in this sort of a situation?
Well, I think that they just made his reintegration and mental and physical health the priority. And because they don't want a skewed investigation. They don't want someone that's, like when they first got him, he wasn't even speaking English. So they want to make sure he's at least competent enough to give them information that's accurate to be used for the investigation and potential trial if there is one. So I think they needed to get him back, get him healthy, get him administratively and sort of the legal protocol in order before they could move forward.
When you think about the years that he spent away from the United States, and you said, of course, he didn't speak English when he came back, isn't there still a tremendous interest here and concern about his mental health and whether or not he will really be able to reintegrate and whether or not he's going to be able to answer any questions, because certainly they want to get information from him. But I would imagine that after someone spends that much time in the hands of the enemy, we're not talking just a few weeks here. This could take years for psychologists to dig into and actually get some truth.
Yeah, and that's why I said in the beginning that the 6-week reintegration process seems a little bit short. And I've got to tell you, morale in the office space at Fort Sam Houston, where Bergdahl is working, is probably not the highest right now. I think that's got to be putting some of those soldiers in a little bit of an uncomfortable situation. I think that's got to be very awkward to be working side by side with him at Fort Sam Houston. But only time will tell, and he recently lawyered up yesterday. He has a new lawyer, a military expert at Yale, who teaches at Yale, which I thought was an interesting twist as well in terms of him getting a civilian lawyer.
I had a chance to speak to some military friends of mine who have been in the military for varying amounts of years, from decades to just a couple of years. And some of them brought forth a point that I thought was interesting. They said perhaps what's going on here, and again, this is all just supposition because we're not really there, but perhaps the military is trying to bring him back in slowly because they believe that they can get really valuable information from him, that he can bring forth something, he suddenly becomes a valuable asset to them in learning more about his captors. Do you think that's really what's going on here? Would you surmise that at least they would like that to be the case?
I do. I think the Army knows what they're doing here. I think there's very valuable information to be gained from Bergdahl and his 5-year experience in Afghanistan. The Army is doing the steps in place that's going to best benefit the Army, the military, and our country. I think there's lots of information to be gained from questioning and talking to Bergdahl and understanding what happened from the get-go all the way to his trade. So I do trust the Army with this process. I do.
What do you think about your personal opinion of the fact that he has not met with his parents and has not spoken to them since he returned to the United States?
Well, I think that is extremely odd. I know after reading up on other hostage or captured situations, or where they've been held, not necessarily, he wasn't captured, but he was held in captivity for 5 years. That's usually the first thing that people do, is they want to talk with their families. So I can't imagine what is going on as to, I don't know what happened before, during. Obviously, I think that speaks a little bit to his mental health as well, but I have no idea why he's not talking to his parents.
Here's an interesting quote that we got from the mother of fallen Second Lieutenant Darren Andrews, and I'm going to put it up here for the folks at home to see as well. The Pentagon claims that there have been no deaths directly related to the abduction of Sergeant Bergdahl, and here is the mother. This is another attempt to give credibility to a deserter to protect the decision to free 5 extremely dangerous Taliban. In the weeks that have gone by now, you certainly talked to a lot of your friends in the military. You've been there. You know what goes on. Is there still this grudge that's being held, and is there still anger that lives in the hearts and minds of a lot of members of the military here, wondering what really is going on here and why this happened in the first place?
Yes, nearly everyone that I talk to that's still active duty or former military is very upset over this entire Bergdahl situation. And that's something that I'd like to bring light to. Since this week, when the Army announced that he's back on active duty, this is detracting from the real problem, which is the Obama administration trading top 5 level Taliban commanders back into the world, who are going to plot attacks against Western societies in the United States. The Bergdahl situation, it happened. Yes, he needed to be rescued. He did not need to be traded for 5 terrorists. That's still unbelievable to me, that the decision, the inept decision, was made to make that trade. It makes no sense, and the U.S. will pay the price for that in the future.
What about the belief from some that perhaps the information they get back from Bergdahl will be worth the 5 Taliban that they released, that they'll be able to actually get some really usable intelligence that may save lives?
No, absolutely not. I think that there probably could have been a rescue. There could have been other ways, I think, to get Bergdahl back without the release of those 5 level Taliban. That was a quick trade in terms of Obama not wanting to leave Afghanistan potentially with a prisoner of war, as he was being called back then. It was to me, a political decision. It took 10 years to find Osama bin Laden. It didn't take 5 years to find Bergdahl.
I have about a minute or so left here, and on a side note, you have been in Afghanistan, you have been in Iraq. There are constant discussions here in America about one political party having a war on women. You've been in the Middle East, and you have seen what a real war on women is, haven't you?
I have, and I actually just recently spoke on this last week. I actually would refuse to comment on the war on women if it wasn't being used by the left so poorly against, like, generalizing women as a whole. There is no war on women in America. It doesn't exist. There is a real war on women, and that exists all around the world. You see it in the Middle East. I saw it in Iraq and Afghanistan when I was over there on my deployments. The oppression of women is real there. They have no freedoms. They have no liberties. They have no voice. They have no freedom of expression or to speak out against what's going on against them. And if they do, they're retaliated against. We saw what happened with the young girl who was shot by the Taliban after blogging about girls' rights for education. That is the real war on women. American women have every single freedom and liberty and choice and possibility that they could ever want for. And it's absolutely it's degrading to me as a woman that certain people in this country are using that as a ploy to exploit women.
And we will have to stop it there. Amber Barno, very well said. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll do it again.
Thank you.
All right, next up, is it past time for Israel to pull back on their latest Hamas offensive as civilians pay the ultimate price? The panel weighs in. You will too, as MidPoint continues.